Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to discuss the books I read in January 2022. January ended up being a lot different of a month than I expected it to be, and the books I ended up reading were books that I wasn't originally intending to read. But the mood struck to read different types of books, or inspiration for a video struck, and I just decided to go with that. I don't do that very frequently, but January felt like the month where I needed and wanted to do that. So a lot of the books I wanted to read in January, I am moving over to my February TBR, as I spoke about in my February TBR video, but I did want to take some time in this video to talk about the books I did get to in January, because I did read quite a few books. So let's talk about those. Let me tell you which written reviews of mine appeared online during the month of January. Let's get into it. I thought I'd start out this video by discussing all of the fiction books that I finished during the month of January, and this first one that I want to talk to you about, it's one that I did have on my January TBR, and it's also one that I hosted a read-along for over on Goodreads. It's called The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This book is a fantasy book. It's about a young woman named Nora, who, after having what is probably the worst day imaginable, like everything goes wrong, when she was already feeling dangerously low, she makes the decision to take her own life, but instead of dying immediately, she goes to this bookish limbo called the Midnight Library. This world is watched over by a former librarian of Nora's, and each book in this collection, there are an infinite number of books, each one of them represents an alternative life that Nora could have led if she had made, in some cases, a slightly different choice, in other cases, a majorly different choice for her life. And so she goes through these little mini experiences of trying those lives out and seeing if she can find one that fits before her time within the Midnight Library limbo runs out. There were a lot of mixed opinions about this book in the comment section of my January TBR when I announced that I was going to be reading this book, and I invited everyone to read it along with me for that read along. So I thought it was going to be a love it or hate it kind of book, and that's really not what it ended up being. Not for me, and I don't think for the vast majority of people who did participate in the read along. I think most of us found this to be very pleasant, definitely very relaxing, occasionally extremely thought-provoking. Like, who amongst us hasn't had the thought, oh, if I had made that one tiny decision differently all those years ago, what kind of life would I be leading now? If I had chosen that profession over the one I ended up with, what would my life be like? Like, I think we've all had those thoughts about our own lives. I certainly have. So that was really interesting to think about as I read this book. But like a lot of other people who participated in the read-along, I did find this to be a little bit predictable and definitely repetitive. But even though a lot of us in the read-along felt that way, there were a lot of different opinions on this book. Some very, very positive, others not so much. And a lot of people brought up fascinating points about this book that I don't know that I would have thought all that much about had they not brought it up. So I'm so happy I hosted a read-along for this book. It really, really enriched the experience, and honestly, it was nice having an excuse to slow down with this book. Like, this is the kind of book that I could sit down and read just in a few hours. Like, it has very, very short chapters. This could have been a book I just blew through, but it was so nice to really take my time with it and chat with everyone about it as we went along. Even my mother participated in the read-along, so she was calling me and giving me her comments. It was just wonderful. So thank you so much to everyone who participated in the read-along. I'm definitely going to host another one. I had so much fun, and I hope you did too. But now let's talk about a romance book that I read in January that I had much less positive feelings about. I read The Weather Girl by Rachel Lynn Solomon, who is the author of The X Talk. I read The X Talk last year, and I really liked it. So when I saw she had a new book out, I decided to pick it up. And this one did not do it for me. The main character of this book is a meteorologist for a local news station in Seattle, Washington, and the two bosses of this news station used to be married to one another. They're exes. They had a very messy divorce, and because neither one of them wants to leave to go work at a different station, they're just kind of at war with each other inside the office and basically anywhere else there are any kind of work functions. It's just a nightmare for everyone who works in that office. So our main character, Ari, and the guy who covers sports for the station, his name is Russell, they both believe that there's something still between these two bosses, hence why they still fight like cats and dogs. So they decide to team up and try to get these two back together in order to create a better working situation for everyone at the station. And of course, in the process, sparks fly between them. Let me start off by talking about the main thing that I did like about this book. And that was one of the romantic leads, Russell, the sports guy. I thought he was so nice, so sweet. He's much more of a regular guy, just like a single dad taking care of his daughter. And I thought that was lovely. I really, really enjoyed Russell's character. But I have to say, I didn't really feel a whole lot of chemistry between him and Ari. Like, I was being told that they had feelings for each other, but I wasn't really feeling it. But then the thing that bothered me the most, the thing I realized after I was done reading the book, is that we didn't really get to see much of Ari actually doing her job as a meteorologist. We get to see her on air a smattering of times, but there's really not much about her sitting down and creating her forecasts that she would then go on to present on air. And that's a part of the job too, not just the on-air stuff. And for as much as Ari loves her job, loves the weather, I mean, there are tons of weather puns in this book, which I actually enjoyed. I do enjoy a good pun. I just felt like we should have seen her at work more. And that's something that cannot be said of the X-Talk. We see them at work. That is a huge part of the X-Talk. But something this book did have in common with the X-Talk is that they both had endings that made me feel more uncomfortable than satisfied, which is just about the opposite of what you want for the ending of a romance book. At the end of the X-Talk, I remember that the characters acted in such an unprofessional way that it still bothers me to this day. And I read that book, I think, about a year ago. And then the ending to this book, Weather Girl, the characters do something so tacky that I just physically reacted. I was like screaming at the book, like, no, don't do that. I'm not going to spoil it and say what it is, but ooh, it's just a no-no. So yeah, this isn't the worst romance book I've ever read in my life, but it is not something that I recommend. I think I gave it 2, maybe 2.5 stars. Then I read a Meg Wolitzer novel from her backlist. It's called The 10-Year Nap. This book is about a group of women living in New York City, I think in the early 2000s. And they're all struggling to have happy home lives with their kids and their husbands, but then a lot of them are contemplating whether or not they want to return to the workforce or how they could go about getting back into the workforce since they had left their jobs 10 years prior, hence the 10-year nap, in order to stay home and raise their kids. I ended up having some mixed feelings about this book, but there were a lot of parts of it that I really liked. I liked that agonizing decision on whether or not to return to work or whether a woman should stay home after having a baby. I like that was a big part of this book. As someone who has nannied in the past, I've seen mothers go through that, and I thought this seemed very true to life. I obviously haven't gone through it myself, but I've seen it, so it seemed very realistic. And also I liked that the feeling of being left behind was in this book, because in the case of one of these women, she met her husband at work and he continues working there even after she decides to stay home with their child. So not only does she feel behind in terms of like the technology they use and how much things change inside of a workplace, but also just the office environment, like all of the office inside jokes or any office news. Like it's really that feeling of she's missing out on something because she chose to stay home. And there's also this undercurrent of envy duality throughout this book of women who are perceived as being able to do it all, to have the career, to not leave work, but then also to be like an A-plus mom, even though it's revealed that a woman like that in this book has secrets of her own. There's also another really interesting element of this book in the fact that a lot of the mothers of these main characters, these grown women, participated in the women's liberation movement a generation before them. So there's this kind of question hanging over them, like, is this what our mothers wanted for us? And are we happy with our choices? So I liked those things about it. I definitely found it to be very thought-provoking. And I always like my novels to make me think. But the issue I'm coming up against right now is that I'm enjoying thinking about the concepts within this novel after the fact a whole lot more than I actually enjoyed reading this book. I thought the cast was overambitiously large. I thought it ran too long, like it could have just been shorter. And so I think my feelings can be best summarized as this book walked, so her latest novel, The Female Persuasion, could run. And then on a whim, I decided to reread Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, which is a book that I had not read since middle school. And after having reread this book as a 30-something-year-old woman, let me just say, I cannot believe I was assigned to read this book in middle school. How was I supposed to understand this book as a preteen? In case you don't know anything about the plot of this classic, it is set in a dystopian future in which firemen don't put out fires. They are actually assigned to set fires, mainly to books, because books and all the ideas contained within have the power to upset people. And the government, of course, wouldn't want that. It is very famously a statement about censorship and how we should prevent it, avoid it. And it's unfortunately still a very important, very relevant topic today. Not sure if you heard the news that Mouse by Art Spiegelman was recently banned by a Tennessee school board. I'm very glad I reread this. I obviously remember bits and pieces of it from when I read it nearly 20 years ago. That's horrifying to say out loud. But obviously, I got a whole lot more out of it this time. But the next book I'm going to talk about is one that I unfortunately DNF'd. It's Mr. Flood's Last Resort by Jess Kidd. This book is about a caretaker who comes into the home of a giant elderly man, and under the influence of her neighbor, she starts to try to unravel the so-called secrets of his life. I was so eager to read this book because I really enjoyed reading her novel Things in Jars, which I read last year. And these two books have very similar elements. Like, there are some supernatural things just kind of casually tossed in. Seems to be something that Jess Kidd enjoys doing in her novels. And both this novel and Things in Jars, they both had main characters who see things and interact with things that only they can see. But even though these two books are so similar, this one just didn't click for me, and I can't even really say why. And this neighbor of the main character is so incredibly pushy, and she is so insistent on the fact that this elderly man, Mr. Flood, is a murderer, even though there's no evidence to suggest that. She is just making it up. And it seems like at first our main character dismisses it as a ridiculous notion, as she should, but then just all of a sudden, inexplicably, she decides that she's on board with that theory and then starts risking her job by poking around this man's house when he's expressly told her not to. I just couldn't follow this for a number of reasons. So it's not like I was hating this book. I just had absolutely no desire to continue. So there's no bad blood. I just didn't want to keep reading it. So I did put it down. But very briefly, let me tell you about the written book reviews of mine that appeared online and in print during the month of January. First, my review of 5 Tuesdays in Winter by Lily King, one of my favorite pieces of fiction of last year, ran ran in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. This is an absolutely fabulous short story collection filled with all different types of stories, but I did notice a unifying theme throughout the collection. If you want to hear more about that, you want to hear more about this collection in general, I will link that review for you in the description box below. Then I had two pieces appear in the Christian Science Monitor in the month of January. The first one was a duo review, so I reviewed two American football books in one piece. The first book was Paradise Found, A Football Team's Rise from the Ashes by Bill Plaschke. This book is about a high school football team in the town of Paradise, California, that lifted the town's spirits after the entire area was decimated by the campfire. And the other book that I reviewed in that piece is called Hail Mary, The Rise and Fall of the National Women's Football League by Brittany De La Critas and Lindsay D'Arcangelo. This is a history of the short-lived but way ahead of its time League of Women's Football Teams in the 1970s. I thought both of these books were fantastic. Paradise Found is emotionally devastating, as you would expect. It's also going to be turned into a movie, in case you want to get a jump on that. If you'd like to read the book before the movie comes out, I highly recommend it. And then Hail Mary, it was just a revelation. I had no idea that there was a women's football league in the States. And now I'm so sad that it died before it really had a chance to thrive. It was so amazing for the women involved. And honestly, reading about the history of it reminded me a lot of what's going on in the WNBA right now. I'm a big WNBA fan, in case you didn't know that. So yeah, I hope it can come back someday. I would love to see women take another shot at having a league, even though I have some mixed feelings about the game of football. But both books are amazing. If you want to learn more about them, I'll link that review in the description box below. And then the other piece I wrote that ran in the Monitor in the month of January is my review of The Rise, Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality by Mike Cielski. This book is mainly about Kobe Bryant's high school experience on and off the court, how he started off as a very naturally talented player, but by the end of high school, he was a ferocious one, ready to head straight to the NBA. I thought this was a fascinating read, very respectfully handled. If you would like to hear more about this, I will of course link my review in the description box below. But now finally, let's talk about the nonfiction books I read in the month of January. And believe it or not, I've actually already reviewed all of the nonfiction I read in January here on the channel. I think that's got to be a first, but I made a whole video review of my first 5-star read of the year, which was Catherine Schultz's memoir, Lost and Found. This is a book about the author's experience losing her father, but then also meeting the woman who would later go on to become her wife in the same brief window of time. It's a reflective, curious, and deeply touching memoir that would be perfect for anyone who likes language and who likes pondering the meanings of words, even mundane ones. I would say actually especially mundane ones. I just thought it was something really special. And if you would like to hear more of my thoughts on this one, I will link my video review in the description box below and up in the cards. And then finally, let me talk about the project that ended up dominating my month in January. It was very unexpected. It is the reason why I didn't get to more of my January books, but I read through all of Helene Hanff's books. I started with Underfoot in Show Business. I picked this up on a whim, and after enjoying it so much, I just didn't really want to stop. So then, of course, I went on to reread 84 Charing Cross Road, one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time, and then I just read all the rest of them. And because I had read these so closely together in time, and since I was already doing so much research on Helene Hanff, just because I was curious about her and I wanted to know more about her as I read through all of her books, I decided to put that information to good use, to seize the day, if you will, and I made Helene Hanff the subject of my very first author spotlight of the year. As I was reading all of her books and doing all of that research on her, I realized that there wasn't one place that you could turn to hear about her books or her life. And so I did my best to create that resource in the form of that video, to pull all the information into one place and give some recommendations about where you could start with her work and how you could move through her work if you're interested in reading more of her books. So I worked really hard on that video. I am sure it's not perfect, but I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I hope it serves as a good resource for anyone who wants to learn more about her. And if you would like to see it, if you missed it, I'll link it for you in the description box and up in the cards. But those were the books and the book reviews of January 2022. If you have any comments or questions about any of these books or about anything in general, please feel free to leave those in the comment section below. And if you would like to keep up with what I'm reading and writing about right now, you can find me on a variety of places around the internet, including Goodreads and Instagram, where I'm the most active. The links to all of my profiles will be at the bottom of the description box below. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.